Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. I'm your host, Michael Lofton. I wasn't expecting to do a show today. I've been extremely busy this week, but I had a few moments to sneak away, and so I decided to go over a couple things that I've been wanting to review. There's been a lot of books and articles that I've been reading lately that I wanted to do some reviews and articles on. So much more is to come, but I did want to touch on a few things that I have a brief moment to address. One is an article I wrote recently about Pope Leo, Aetius, and Patriarch Anatolius. We're going to review that, and it is, of course, based on an article that Martin Jugi wrote on papal primacy in the East. I think it's worthwhile looking at a few points that he mentions there. For the sake of ecumenical discussions, I think that there's a lot that the Eastern Orthodox perspective could address in response to what Martin Jugi wrote there. So hopefully we'll have more interaction on that to come, especially after I do this brief review. Then we're going to touch on some of the words that Philip the Legate quoted before the Council of Ephesus in 431, also on papal primacy. And after that, I want to briefly touch on a few things that Bart Ehrman said in a debate with Darrell Bach. It's an old debate. It's nothing new, but it's new for me just because it was something I only was able to watch recently. Very enjoyable, but there are some areas where Bart Ehrman likes to venture out, step outside of his area of expertise, which is, of course, the text of the New Testament and its transmission, and likes to delve into matters of theology and then make speculative decisions and opinions about the text because of perhaps misunderstandings about theology, in particular with Paul. So we'll be discussing his view on First and Second Thessalonians. So that's what we're up against today. Again, probably not going to be a very long or in-depth discussion just since I have some time constraints, but I figured a show is better than no show. So here we go. All right, so let me pull up my screen here and let's see if I can get the, let me do it like this. Give y'all a broad view here. Yeah, I think y'all can see that. All right, again, this is an article I wrote, let's see, January 17th. So recently at reasonandtheology.com website, Papal Primacy, the case of Pope Leo, Aetius, and Anatolius. Again, it is something that I'm simply reviewing, condensed something that I saw from an article that Martin Jugi wrote called The Roman Primacy in the East at the Time of St. Leo the Great. So he's talking about Pope Leo, and he speaks about how Pope Leo time after time after time interfered in the affairs of the East, not only in matters of liturgy, but also in matters of discipline and matters of doctrine. And I'm going to focus only on a few of this. I'm not really going to touch on the issue of liturgy. Y'all can read the article that he wrote if you want to read more. But here we go. Okay, so during the reign of Pope Leo the Great, the pro-Chalcedonian Archdeacon Aetius, he was essentially removed from ministry by Patriarch Anatolius. And Anatolius, if you're not familiar with him, at first he was somewhat leaning towards the views of Dioscorus because that was actually his teacher. In fact, Dioscorus is the one who ordained Anatolius. So he had some Eutychian views, if you will. Well, at least he had some leanings that way initially. Now, he removes Aetius, who was especially in favor of Ephesus and Chalcedon. And in his place, he installs Deacon Andrew, who advocated for Eutychianism. And just in case you're not familiar with the background, what he essentially did with Aetius, He actually elevated him to the priesthood, but he exiled him to a really remote location and just made him in charge of a cemetery. And so it was essentially a demotion, because if you go from being a deacon in the Church of Constantinople to being a priest in some remote location in this, taking care of a cemetery, you're essentially being dishonored. It's a demotion. So it in fact was not any kind of elevation, even though he ordained him to the priesthood. Again, he placed Deacon Andrew in his place at the Church of Constantinople. And of course, this raised a lot of concerns. Pope Leo the Great was informed by his nuncio. In fact, he's the first nuncio that we know of to the East. He was informed by his nuncio that Anatolius had done this, and Pope Leo was not happy to hear about this. He immediately wrote to him and told him what he is doing is wrong. So he's interfering in the affairs of a patriarch, and his moves concerning who's going to be in what position in the church. Anatolius was very alarmed by the letter that he received, and he wrote to the emperor pleading for the emperor to write to Pope Leo to bring him back into good graces. And he let him know, okay, I went ahead and put Etius back into place, and I excommunicated Andrew. So please receive me back into your good favor, was essentially the way Patriarch Anatolius responded. And I'm going to read actually part of the letter to y'all in just a minute, but I'm going to make a quick reference to it. He says, "Far be it from me that I would ever make opposition to the orders which had been given to me from the Pope." So he's very, very compliant in his response to Pope Leo, immediately conforming to his desires, in his words. Again, we'll take a look at the letter here in just a second. It's also interesting, later on in the same letter, he goes to talk about Canon 28, because he knows Pope Leo was very upset with Anatolius about this matter. If you don't know the background, of course, Anatolius was present at Chalcedon and was partly behind, well, maybe not actually advocating it, but it happened under his observance. Canon 28 was passed, and in the letter he's very apologetic and says, I actually had nothing to do with this was other people who were in the church that were pushing it through. And he says, quote, its efficacy and its confirmation have been reserved to the authority of your holiness. So he immediately bows to Pope Leo on the matter of Canon 28 and says it's essentially subject to his authority. Now, another thing is, whenever he was elevated to his position, I'm speaking here of Anatolius, when he was elevated to his position as Patriarch of Constantinople, it's interesting that he writes his confession, letter of confession to the Pope, which is something, very common anytime a patriarch was elevated to their position. It was common for them to write letters to each other saying, here's my view, here's my confession, so that they would know you're Orthodox. Well, he wrote to Pope Leo, and it wasn't very clear where he stood on the matter of Ephesus. So, because Chalcedon had not actually happened yet. So it was kind of unclear where he sat. Pope Leo immediately cut off correspondence with him and began just communicating through the emperor. Long story short, Pope Leo sends legates, I want to say 4 legates, to Constantinople with the instruction that he is to hold a council, and in front of all of the clergy of Constantinople is to essentially confess his orthodoxy in front of everyone, and is to adhere to the letter, I want to say the second letter of Cyril to Nestorius, so that they would know he's Orthodox, which the legates arrived in 450. They assembled in a council, and in fact, that's exactly what happened. Anatolius bowed to the wishes of Pope Leo and affirmed an Orthodox position. So here you see a patriarch in the East allowing the Pope to interfere in matters of jurisdiction in his territory, claiming that Canon 28 and canons of ecumenical councils must be subject to the authority of a pope to have any authority and efficacy. Those are his words, not mine. And of course, basically bowed to a pope who believed that he was in authority over orthodoxy itself because he made patriarch, and it's confess the Orthodox faith before you would have anything to do with him. So let me pull up the actual quote or the letter. This is part of the letter, not the entire thing. Comes from Patrologia Latina. I'll get the reference for y'all here in just a second. In fact, actually, I have it right here. Pull that up. Let's see. Epistle 132 from Anatolius to Pope Leo. All right. Let's see. And if y'all want the reference in Ming, let me know and I'll get it for you. I want to say it's at the very back of this PDF. All right, here we go. So here's what that is Anatolius, wrote to Pope Leo. He says, God forbid that I should make opposition to the orders which had been given to me by letter. As soon as our most pious and Christian prince had communicated to me the letters of your holiness, I hastened to conform to the desires which they expressed. Both the interest of common peace as well as simple propriety impelled me to it. At the very reverend priest of our holy church, ETS has been reestablished in his former position and ecclesiastical dignity. It is he who administers with wisdom and prudence the business of our bishopric. In regard to Andrew, whom we would not have ordained ourselves, but who was promoted according to regular order to the dignity of archdeacon, he has been separated from the church with the adversaries of our father and bishop of saintly memory, Flavian, that is to say, with the very same ones who have made common cause with the perfidious Eutyches. It is true that they seem to have given sufficient satisfaction for the deed by manifesting their repentance and subscribing to the letter of your holiness. They will remain, however, in that state up to that time that you will decide on their lot as it seems good to you. So those who basically did not necessarily confess the Orthodox faith or were not clear about it or just outright opposed it, they're alienated, and their state and their relation to the church will continue to be estranged until Pope Leo decides what to do with them. In regard to the decree of the Universal Council of Chalcedon in favor of the See of Constantinople, that is Canon 28, your holiness may be sure that I had no part in it, so that I have peace and tranquility since my youth. Now, again, he was there. It happened in his presence. He knew what was going on. The venerable clergy of the Church of Constantinople took this initiative in accord with the religious bishops of our regions who insisted on the measure. But all its efficacy and its confirmation have been reserved to the authority of your holiness. So he's saying Canon 28, its confirmation, its authority, its efficacy is reserved to the papacy. Let me see if I can get the reference for y'all in Ming. Let's see. Here's the column number. Epistle 132, column 108. I'm sorry, 102. Gosh. Yeah, 1082 to 1084. Let's see. I'll have to get the volume for you, though. It's going to be back here somewhere. So just email me, text me, or I can probably put it in the description later on because I'm not seeing it readily available. But I find it very interesting that the patriarch said these things. And, it should be said when we speak about Chalcedon and Canon 28, it should be noted that the Eastern bishops, whenever they passed this canon, they didn't really think that there would be much opposition, if any. In fact, they thought Pope Leo would be favorable to it. So they didn't feel like, oh, let's take this opportunity to push something through that we know the Pope's not okay with, but we really, really want to affirm this. It wasn't anything like that. They thought that Pope Leo was going to be favorable to it, but of course he wasn't. All right, so hopefully that will be enough to start a dialogue between Catholics and Orthodox on this matter, between Leo's supremacy or alleged supremacy and Patriarch Anatolius. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Any Orthodox who can offer a response and explain how this isn't a very good example of papal supremacy, I'd love to hear your comments on it. So put those in the comment section. All right, let's take a look at Philip the Legate. I was reading Dom John Chapman, and he was, of course, a Catholic convert. I want to say he was a convert to Catholicism, a priest, and he wrote a lot of books, but the one that I'm reading in particular is on the first 8 ecumenical councils and papal infallibility. That's the title. And he's going over, as you can imagine, the first 8 ecumenical councils and trying to show papal supremacy and papal infallibility in them. Now, there's a whole lot that I could say, and I'll probably do an entire book review on it, but I did want to touch on something real quick, a brief quote that I came across from the papal legate at Ephesus 431, who spoke in front of the council fathers. Now, mind you, he's speaking in Latin. Most of the fathers there speak Greek. So it's probably the case that what he was saying in their presence, unless they had some kind of translator, they may not have understood it. However, his words were inserted into the acta of the council, and the acta in Greek was confirmed by later ecumenical councils. So nobody could say, well, council fathers didn't really understand what was being said there, because, again, the words of Philip in Greek were accepted later on in the acta. All right, well, let's take a look at it. Let's see, I have it pulled up here. These are the words of Philip the Legate to Ephesus, the Council Fathers. It is doubtful to no one, nay, it is known to all ages, that the holy and blessed Peter, the prince and head of the apostles. Let's stop there, because now I know Meyendorff hammered this away. He wrote a good book here. Let me see where it is. I read it a few years ago. I had it somewhere over here. There it is. The Primacy of Peter by Meyendorff. Everybody should read that. And he goes over the Eastern views of Peter, pretty much from the beginning of church history, throughout Byzantine history. And, anybody who wants to say, well, Peter wasn't head of the apostles, I mean, this is something that's repeated over and over and over in church history. In fact, he was. You might see a few quotes here and there by a church father saying somebody else was the head. And I want to say Meyendorff mentions them, like John, if I'm not mistaken. He's mentioned it maybe once. But the vast majority of time, you see people speaking about Peter as the head or prince of the apostles. So anybody, especially some of the Orthodox who like to have reactionary theology instead of really looking at their own history and developing a theology based on their own history, they just look and see what Catholics say, and then they react to it and say, okay, well, we don't believe that. So if Catholics say Peter is the head of the apostles, all right, well, we're going to react to that and say we don't believe that. Then they end up denying something in their own very tradition. So anybody who has any reservations about it, take note here. Peter, the prince and head of the apostles, the pillar of the faith. Now that's a very interesting term there. I want to say Titus. If I'm not mistaken, it was Titus. It's one of the Pauline epistles, speaks about the church being the pillar of the faith and the foundation of the Catholic Church, received from our Lord Jesus Christ. So this is the Peter. This was something, and I'm sorry. Let me back it up here. Peter and his office is something received as a commission by Christ, the Savior of the human race. And he was given, of course, the keys of the kingdom, and that to him was given the power of loosing and binding sins. Now, let me stop there. Of course, the other apostles were given the keys by extension, and also have the power of loosing and binding, as again we see in Matthew 18, but it is Peter who receives them first. And so the Catholic is going to essentially say Peter receives the keys principally, and the rest of the apostles receive them through Peter. And that's why you actually have medieval ecumenical councils affirming that the rest of the apostles also have the keys of the kingdom and have the ability to loose and bind sins. All right, power of loosing and binding sins, who up to this time and always lives in his successors. Let me stop there. He's saying this institution or this office of Peter as the head of the apostles, the pillar of the faith, the foundation of the church, was received by Christ. And this authority is passed on to his successors, not only up to this time, but always. So this is a perpetual succession, a perpetual office until the end of time. And always lives in his successors and gives judgment. His successor and representative, therefore, our holy and most blessed Pope, Bishop Celestine, has sent us to this synod to supply his place. So let's just make a couple comments here. First of all, there's a lot of Orthodox who have a very, very low view of primacy, especially papal primacy. And I'd like to see how they would answer this. Second of all, there are Orthodox who hold to a very high view of papal primacy. They would hold to something very, very high, just shy of Vatican I. But they would basically say that authority has been transferred, from the Pope either to Constantinople, or is just not something that is essential to the constitution of the church. So since the Pope is in heresy right now, he does not hold this position. As long as he is in orthodoxy, then all of this applies to him. Again, the problem here, as I noted, is who up to this time and always lives in his successors. Well, maybe I'm just being hyper literal here, but it just seems like he's saying that this is something that was going to endure always, as Vatican I puts it. So people can say this is flowery language. They can make all kinds of arguments. But again, this was accepted by the fathers in the Acta. So anybody that wants to oppose papal supremacy, that's fine. That's great. I would just like to see interaction with material like this. How can one say, I confess the 7 ecumenical councils, for example, Orthodox, who have the very claim that they are the church of the 7 councils. Okay, so how can an Eastern Orthodox accept the 7 councils when they say things like this? I would just like to see a cogent response. So again, hopefully this will perpetuate more dialogue. Please put your thoughts in the comment section. Let me pull up a video here by Bart Ehrman. Ehrman, however you want to say his name. I've heard it both ways. I don't know what is going on here. Let me see if I can move this. Let me show this to y'all. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. What is going on with the neck beard? Soon as I saw that, I just wanted to grab a razor and shave this part off right here. We just need to maybe we can Photoshop it off of there. I don't know, but guys with neck beards really bother me. All right, let's get to it. Let me see. Y'all let me know if you can't hear the audio when I'm playing it. You should be able to hear it, but again, let me know if you don't.
So, but your basic thing is that the understanding of the end times in 2 Thessalonians seems to be different from the understanding of 1 Thessalonians. That in 1 Thessalonians, Paul tells these people that Jesus is coming right away. He's going to come like a thief in the night. It's going to be sudden. It'll be unexpected, and they need to be ready for it. Mm-hmm. In 2 Thessalonians, he details an entire scenario that no, it's not going to come right away. first this has to happen, then this has to happen, then that has to happen. And so don't be put off by thinking that it's going to come right away. And that seems to be contradictory.
All right. So let's stop right there. He has other reasons for believing that First and Second Thessalonians are not written by the same author, namely the Apostle Paul. But one of the principal reasons, at least that's the impression I get from this debate, is that First and Second Thessalonians has a doctrinal or a conceptual contradiction, because as you heard in First Thessalonians, Paul allegedly thinks that the day of the Lord, the second coming, is going to be something that is going to be any moment. It's imminent. It's going to take place at any time. So be ready. But then the author of Second Thessalonians, who he does not believe is Paul, seems to say, no, it's not imminent. It's not going to be right away. Here's some conditions. Here's some things that have to take place. Now, I get Bart Ehrman's not a theologian. I understand that. I understand he is an expert in New Testament textual criticism. But what he likes to do is he likes to venture out of his area of expertise and dive into other areas like theology. And then he begins to make all kinds of really bad arguments. So I don't know why he does it. Surely he knows how bad some of these arguments sound. At least I would hope he does. It's quite easy to harmonize this, and it's not even as he makes you think it is. Let me pull it up on the screen, maybe zoom in a little more and show you the text. Let's go through it, and let's see if his presentation that we just heard really holds. All right, now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But here's the key. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. And let me read couple more verses, and then I'll just kind of give an exposition. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through Christ our Lord. So, what's going on here? Again, this is 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 9. Here's what he's saying. He's saying the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night, basically to unbelievers, for those who are not vigilant, for those who are not paying attention. It will come suddenly. But you, Thessalonians, you who are vigilant, it will not surprise you, because you are not children of the darkness. You are children of the light, and you will be vigilant. You will be paying attention to the signs of the times. Second Thessalonians is addressing something else. And let me establish that. Second Thessalonians 2, 1 through 5, the author, which I believe is Paul, tells you what's going on here. Now, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and being gathered together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Very important. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? All right, so what's going on here? He's saying somebody is writing in his name. They're sending them a letter saying the day of the Lord has already come. Paul is writing to them to correct them and say, that is not the case, because as I already told you when I was there in person, That day will not come until the man of lawlessness is revealed. So here's a very easy way to harmonize First and Second Thessalonians. First Thessalonians is saying it's going to come like a thief in the night to those who are not paying attention to the signs of the times, like the man of lawlessness. But you, brethren, Thessalonians, you're not people of darkness. You are children of the light, and you will be prepared because I've already told you the man of lawlessness must come first. Somebody must have wrote to them, confusing them, saying, hey, the day of the Lord has already come. So he writes to them again and says, look, I've already told you. You already know this. Don't be confused. The man of lawlessness must come and reveal himself. Then the day of the Lord will come. So there's really no contradiction here. It's quite easy to harmonize. But the way Bart Ehrman makes it seem is like this. Paul writes to the Thessalonians and says, hey, be ready. Jesus is going to come back at any moment. So be ready. It could happen anytime. And then all of a sudden in Second Thessalonians, the author is saying, nah, it's a long time from now. All kinds of things has to happen, blah, blah, blah. So it couldn't be the same author. But I mean, clearly, as we've just seen, that is obviously not what's going on. He's talking about the day of the Lord coming quickly without warning on those who are not vigilant. But those who are vigilant, they will not be surprised because they will be paying attention to the signs of the time. So I don't see how this is a contradiction. And Bart Ehrman is filled with examples like these. And in the book of Hebrews, all kinds of others, when it comes to the Gospels, I've listened to a lot of Dr. Ehrman, and it seems like anytime he starts shying away from the text of the New Testament and starts to discuss contradictions or the theology, and maybe tries to show how this affects the dating of something because this couldn't possibly be Paul or blah, 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 blah. That's when he starts to go off the deep end and speak into matters that he's not really accurate on. So I wanted to present that as a quick critique. Much more to come on Ehrman. Like I said, I've been listening to a lot of his material and have for years, but I'll continue to listen to his material, read his books, and interact with what I see. There's much more that I wanted to touch on, but again, I have some time restrictions here, so we'll go ahead and leave it there. Hope you all enjoyed it. A lot of good stuff, exciting stuff coming. A lot of good guests coming up, and some possibly other good news that I'll be revealing pretty soon. So stay tuned, everybody. Again, thank you for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe, share this material on your social media. Until next time, God bless you all.